Hi there, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this, and this is What's Left that you're watching. I'm the host, my name is Larry Erickson, and for the next half hour or so, I'm going to be rattling on about some stuff that I hope you'll be interested in, and stay with us for the time. If you have any reactions to the show, you can always send them to me directly. This is my personal email here, whoviating@aol.com. Or if you prefer, you can go to my website, which is called Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here somewhere a couple of times during the show. You can get the email address from there if you didn't have time to run out and get pencil and paper and write it down, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather. Just one thing or two things: if you do send me email, please include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, and be a little patient about getting an answer. All right, with that, we're going to start right off by jumping right into it. This is one of our regular features. This is the Outrage of the Week. You may recall that last week I ended the show with the outrage and said that it was kind of a teaser for this week because I only had a couple of minutes then to do it in, and that I would make it the first order of business this week, so that's exactly what I'm doing. And it's just a reminder. Last week, in talking about the outrage, I started by reminding you of my rules for right-wing debate, and rule number 18 being, if you can't win by the rules, change them. And a great example of this, I've always said, is voter suppression. The right wing knows it cannot win elections consistently if the broad swath of the American public actually turns out to vote. So what they've been doing for the past several years is trying to make it harder and harder for people to vote at all, particularly people like the poor, minorities, and young people who they fear are the ones least likely to vote for the reactionaries. But the rules they're trying to change now are literally the rules of the First Amendment. Faced with outraged citizens and ongoing protests, both large and small, faced with outraged constituents at town halls, the Goppers are looking for ways to make it harder and harder for people to publicly protest at all. In the days immediately following the historic demonstrations of January 21st, Goppers in at least 6 state legislatures were moving to try to block or at least minimize public protest by criminalizing peaceful protest and by sharply increasing the penalties for nonviolent civil disobedience. And in fact, in at least 3 of these cases, the states involved proposed to forgive crimes committed against protesters so long as they were done accidentally. The number of states considering such laws quickly rose from 6 to 8 to 10 and now stands at least 18. Arizona, Colorado, Florida, Georgia, Iowa, Indiana, Michigan, Minnesota, Missouri, Mississippi, North Carolina, North Dakota, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Tennessee, Virginia, and Washington all have such laws or have considered such laws since the election about limiting protest. There are proposals to ban the use of masks at protests, to increase penalties for trespass on so-called critical infrastructure, which seems larger to be whatever that particular state, places where they just don't want demonstrations to happen. There's even a proposal that would make heckling of government officials a crime. But there are others that go well beyond that. Last week, I told you about a proposed law in Arizona that would expose all participants in and organizers of any demonstration where property damage occurs or is thought might occur to racketeering charges, which involve not only up to a year in prison, but also the seizure of your personal property and assets. Now, that bill passed the Arizona Senate, but happily it failed in the House. But it's not the only example of states considering laws to financially crush protest. Michigan is working on a law about mass picketing. If a demonstration is deemed an illegal mass picket, penalties for taking part in such an action would shoot up to $1,000 per person per day and $10,000 per organization per day. And the thing is, what's most interesting about this is that it's hard to find a legal definition of exactly what constitutes an illegal mass picket. It seems really to come down to the question of, can the target of the picketing find some judge who will decide that there were more people picketing than there need to be to make the point? In another tack on the same line, in Minnesota, a proposed bill would allow localities to charge protesters for the cost of policing the protests. Also in Minnesota, apparently keeping the traffic flowing is more important than the right of protest. A bill there would triple the fine for taking part in the blockade of a roadway from $1,000 to $3,000 and lengthen the jail time from 90 days to a full year. An early version of a bill under Indiana called on police to clear any roadway blocked by protesters within 15 minutes by, quote, any means necessary, unquote. And that's not even good enough for Iowa and Mississippi, where proposals would make blocking a highway a felony, punishable by 5 years in prison. And that's nothing, says North Dakota. We would exempt a driver from liability if they injure or kill a protester taking part in a blockade of a street or highway, provided only that it was done accidentally, as if the driver never noticed the traffic backup or saw any of these large group of people standing in the road. That bill failed to pass the House in North Dakota by what in a sane world would be the shockingly narrow margin of 50 to 41. But meanwhile, Florida and Tennessee both have bills with the same kill a protester, no problem idea under consideration. Now, it's important to note that not all of these efforts will succeed. A number of them never got out of committee, still others failed to pass, and some others got through one house of a bicameral state legislature only to die in the other. Perhaps none of these bills will actually become law. And it's also true that a number of these bills, were they ever passed into law, would likely not survive a constitutional challenge. That doesn't change the fact that these bills have been introduced. They have been considered, they have been debated, they have been supported by some. It doesn't change the fact that there is a concerted and ongoing push to find ways to respond to protests, not by embracing their message, not even by considering if maybe they have a point, but by shutting them down, silencing them by silencing those who take part in them, by threatening them with the potential of such severe consequences that they are intimidated from taking part, that it's silencing them by, to use a more legalistic term, chilling their speech. And if you have any doubt of that, just remember this. Douglas McAdam, his name is, a Stanford sociology professor who studies protest movements, notes that this is hardly for the first time this kind of thing has happened. For example, when the U.S. labor movement got going in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a number of laws were created to, quoting him, limit or outlaw labor organizing or limit labor rights. For another example, in the 1950s, southern states responded to the emergent civil rights movement with dozens of new bills outlawing civil rights groups, limiting the rights of assembly, and more, all in an effort to make civil rights organizing more difficult. Again, all that's according to McAdam. In fact, even the wild, laughable charges of paid protesters, he says, are nothing new. So yes, this is nothing new. Rather, it's what you should expect when the voice of the people rises up to challenge the reactionaries. It is their natural reaction, their knee-jerk response to look for ways to shut us up and shut us down, to just make us go away. But that doesn't change the fact that these bills have been introduced. In fact, it underlines the fact that these bills have been introduced. It underlines the fact that there is an ongoing assault on the right to assemble. And it doesn't change. In fact, it underlines the fact that this is an outrage. All right, next up, and you know how, what else these bills are besides being an outrage? They're a call to action. A call to keep on keeping on. Now, I have to give you a lesson from the dreaded 60s. In the 1950s, the House Un-American Activities Committee, known as HUAC, H-U-A-C, intimidated and silenced a good deal of potential opposition with the political blackmail of hearings and investigations designed to accuse someone of being in the Communist Party, or of knowing someone in the Communist Party, or having once been at a party where someone who knew a communist was also present. It didn't matter how tenuous the connection was, as long as they could claim one existed. But as the McCarthy era ended, HUAC fell into disrepute. Now, yes, the McCarthy committee was in the Senate, this was in the House, but still, once McCarthy fell, this kind of fell along with it. In the 1960s, there was an attempt to revive the committee under its new name, the House Internal Security Committee, to investigate what was known as the New Left, the radical opposition to the Indochina War. The hearings, it turned out, were a farce. They were a total failure for the committee. Why? Because the witnesses they called, including, foolishly for them, people like Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin, simply refused to be intimidated. What is your relation to the Communist Party? Those old-line, stiff-necked, no-fun hacks? Yuck. Well, but isn't it true that you are a revolutionary? Yes. That refusal to be intimidated, that determination, in other words, to keep on doing what you were doing and do it in the way that you had been doing it, to be neither stampeded nor hobbled by what the state wanted or expected of you, that is one of the things that made the movement of the 1960s so powerful. And yes, it was a powerful movement, despite attempts recently to put it down. It was, as I've written before, this movement was powerful enough that over a several-year span, it was able to limit and finally stop a war, force one and maybe two presidents from office, bring the nuclear power industry to a virtual standstill, change our society's perception about half its population, and shift, perhaps not by much, but surely permanently, that society's sense of its relationship to the environment. Now, the important point, the lesson of this excursion into nostalgia, is that in the face of attempted suppression, the best weapon we have, the thing we absolutely should do, is just keep on going. And the fact is, these days we have been. February 16th was a day without immigrants. Restaurants, grocery stores, food trucks, coffee shops, diners, and taco stands and cities across the country had to shut down for the day, either because they just didn't have enough staff or in solidarity, actually, with the movement. The effect was strongest in the restaurant industry, where immigrants make up the majority of the 12 million people employed there, but the construction industry, which also employs a large number of immigrants, also felt a real impact, as unfortunately did some employees who were fired for taking part in the action. Now, whether those firings are legal or not is a different question, but it would be a hard legal fight to show it, which frankly just makes solidarity with immigrants even more important. Speaking of solidarity, on February 18th, thousands of folks marched in Los Angeles under the banner, "I am a Muslim too," in a day of solidarity with immigrants and refugees protesting the Trump's Muslim travel ban. The next day, something over 1,000 people came to Times Square in New York City carrying the same message. The day after that, in 28 cities across the country, President's Day became Not My President's Day, as thousands of people participated in marches and rallies to declare that the rump does not speak for us. And this happened not just in the obvious places like Los Angeles and New York and Washington, D.C., but in places like Atlanta, Austin, Rapid City, South Dakota, Nashville, Indianapolis, Concord, New Hampshire, Santa Barbara, and others. Crowd sizes range from dozens to several thousand to over 10,000 in New York. Now, it's true, and it was noted some places, that the turnouts were significantly smaller than those of the historic protests of January 21st. But that's not important, because what's important is the persistence. Now, not again, as I've said this before, not again that there has to be a march or a demonstration or something every day or even every week. but that there should be a constant rumble of opposition, a constant rumble of resistance to the course on which the deeply reactionary cabal in the White House would place us. And a quick sidebar here. This is as a matter of a personal comment. Some people have said that they don't like the idea of saying "not my president." They're saying, because like it or not, he is the president. Well, and I say, yes, he did win. He did win the presidency by the means that we use, won it legally by the means that we now use, the way of counting. Although I will say I have been against using the Electoral College since I was in grade school, and that's not a joke. But he did win by the standards that we use now, so he is legally president, has all the legal authority of the presidency. So in a legal sense, yes, he is my president. But I will continue to say that he is not my president, to make it clear that he does not speak for me. Now, since I became politically active, there has not been a president that I have actually embraced. Okay. I have opposed some more than others, but there's been none that I actually fully embraced. Although again, I did embrace some more strongly than others, I will say that. But this is the first time I've talked about "not my president" or used that term, because this is the first time where it has been so consistent, so across the board, so persistent, that what's coming out of this cabal in the White House is so offensive to justice, so offensive to democratic, by which I'm small d, democratic values, so offensive to the principles on which this country supposedly was founded, that I say that no, you do not speak for me. You do not. Anyway, moving on from there, getting back to the topic, to the big deal of late, which was March 8th, International Women's Day, and a day without a woman, the women's strike. This is a day of action including over 400 local events in over 50 nations around the world. Women rising to declare their independence, their worth, and their dignity, and to proclaim their future as full and equal beings. Part of the purpose was to show women's impact on society and the economy, and one impact here in the U.S. was immediate and obvious. Entire school districts in some states had to shut down for the day because without women, who account for 87% of elementary school teachers in this country, they just didn't have enough staff to keep schools open. The marches, protests, and rallies in the U.S. addressed a range of issues, including LGBTQ rights, support for Planned Parenthood, workplace harassment, health care, the gag rule that says foreign nonprofits that offer abortion services cannot get any assistance from the U.S., and more issues, including, of course, equal pay and a living wage. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, women make up more than 47% of the entire labor force, and they are dominant in areas including registered nurses, dental assistants, cashiers, accountants, and pharmacists. They make up at least a third of physicians and surgeons, a third of lawyers, a third of judges, and they represent 55% of all college students. But at the same time, American women still earn less than 80 cents for every dollar a man makes. And that difference persists across educational levels. Now, you probably can't read this graph very well. You probably can't see it very well. But just know that what it shows, it's divided into educational levels, from less than a high school diploma to an advanced degree at the bottom. In each case, the dark blue line is the average of what men with that degree of education can expect to make. The pale blue line is what a woman with that degree of education can expect to make. I want you to note particularly that a woman with an advanced degree can expect to earn less than a man with a bachelor's. We have a long way to go. But women around the world are saying, ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. And with them saying that, we will get there. Let's take a break. And here we are back again. And we're going to move on now to one of our regular weekly features. This is the Clown Award, given as always for some act of meritorious stupidity. And I got to tell you, I try to stay away from the usual targets, the obvious targets. I really do. I don't want to spend the time in the show like pointing and laughing at the people that others are already pointing and laughing at. But sometimes the clowns are so clowny, they just sort of launch themselves at you. And this week I felt like I was under siege with 3 bodies flying my way. Okay, first up, on March 7th, the Rump took to Twitter to say that, quoting because it's important, 122 vicious prisoners released by the Obama administration from Gitmo have returned to the battlefield. Just another terrible decision. He then posted the same thing again, word for word, from his official White House account. And of course, it was wrong. It turned out only 8 of those prisoners were released under the Obama administration. Those others were released by George Bush. Asked about this, Sean Spicer said, obviously, the president meant in totality the number that had been released. Except, of course, that's not what he said. He said, released by the Obama administration. But wait, I have a problem here now. I mean, who's the clown? The Rump for his typical boneheadedness, or our favorite Melissa McCarthy impersonator for the lamest attempt at a save imaginable? So maybe we better move on to our next clown, Representative Jason Chaffetz. And when asked on March 7th, about if the Gopper's ruination of the Affordable Care Act would result in fewer Americans having health insurance coverage, Representative Chuff said, and this is a quote, Americans have got to make a choice. Instead of getting that new iPhone that they just love and want to spend hundreds of dollars on, maybe they should invest in their own health care. They've got to make those decisions themselves. So not only is he saying that everyone can afford a new iPhone, but it's up to us to choose iPhone or healthcare, because apparently they cost the same. How far out of touch do you have to be to say something that stupid? And how stupid do you have to be to try to cover yourself the next day by saying, I didn't say it as smoothly as I could, but that what you really meant was that people should be responsible, which means in other words we're not, and self-reliant. So that if you have, for example, a pre-existing condition, you should invest in a health savings account. Or apparently the idea is we should just save up to get that treated. How out of touch, how stupid do you have to be to do this? You'd have to be Jason Chaffetz. Oh, but when it comes to being out of touch, he can barely hold a candle to our winner. So this week, the big red nose goes to the man who thinks that Joseph built the pyramids to store grain, the Big Bang is a fairy tale, and that the Affordable Care Act is the worst thing since slavery, Ben Carson. A man who was a successful neurosurgeon and so can't be as much of a dunderhead as he seems to be, and yet he is. On March 7th, taking over as the new head of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, he gave a speech to agency employees. During the speech, he talked about immigrants, saying they work not for themselves, but for their sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters, that they might have an opportunity in this land. And then came this. There were other immigrants who came here in the bottom of slave ships, who worked even longer, even harder, for less. But they too had a dream that one day their sons, daughters, grandsons, granddaughters might pursue prosperity and happiness in this land. So yeah, you heard that right. Ben Carson describes slaves as immigrants looking for a better life for their descendants. Frankly, I can't think of a thing to say. So I'll defer to the Anne Frank Center for Mutual Respect, which denounced Carson in a statement which ended this way. We condemn your statement and suggest you try this one instead. Black Lives Matter. To which I can only add, Ben Carson, clown. All right, finally, a few minutes on something I haven't talked about in a while, privacy in a digital age. This is prompted, I expect you realize, by the release of a trove of CIA documents by WikiLeaks, revealing a slew of the agency's hacking techniques and hacking programs. This is, the group says, the first in a series of releases it's calling Vault 7. The title of the first release is Year Zero, and the nearly 9,000 documents in the dump describe clandestine methods for bypassing or defeating encryption, antivirus tools, and other protective security features intended to keep the private information of citizens and corporations private. Experts who sifted through the material said it appears to be genuine. The documents provide an overview of the scope and direction of the CIA's global covert hacking program, of its malware arsenal, and dozens of zero-day weaponized exploits against a wide variety of U.S. and European company products, including Apple's iPhone, Google's Android, Microsoft Windows, and even Samsung TVs, which are converted into covert microphones. According to WikiLeaks' press release, the CIA can also bypass the encryption of WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, Weibo, Confide, and Cloakman, and the documents describe ways of tricking various antivirus programs into allowing malicious code to be injected into a computer. In other words, the idea is if the CIA wants to know, it will find out no matter what you do to protect yourself, because all your secrets are belonging to us. What's more, there are indications that the CIA was working on infecting the vehicle control systems used by modern cars and trucks, which could, at least hypothetically, enable the agency to take over vehicles on the road and stop them or direct them to wherever it is the agents wanted them to go. Now, what's not included in this release, by the way, are the actual hacking tools themselves. WikiLeaks said it planned to avoid distributing them until a consensus emerged on how to deal with such software. Now, it's worth recalling here that the NSA has for some time had a unit called Tailored Access Operations, the very mandate of which is to get the spooks, to enable the spooks to hack any computer, anywhere, anytime. Getting the ungettable is the NSA's own description of the unit's duties. So this isn't actually a new field for the spooks, and may actually just involve the crudest, basest sort of interagency rivalry and jealousy. I mean, is the CIA doing this just because they're resentful of having to depend on the NSA for certain types of intelligence, or they're jealous of the fact that the NSA has a capacity that they don't? Meanwhile, the poor relation among the techno-spooks, the FBI, is still whining about encryption. At a cybersecurity conference hosted at Boston College on March 7th, FBI Director James Comey declared that there is no such thing as absolute privacy in America. That, he said, is the bargain. We made that bargain over 2 centuries ago to achieve 2 goals, privacy and security. Widespread default encryption changes that bargain. It shatters that bargain. That is, the inability of the FBI to penetrate modern encryption on our phones, our ability to keep our private information private, is destroying the ability of the noble surveillance state to keep us safe and secure. Now, the fact that his statement came just a day after the WikiLeaks document dump gave a certain surreal edge to it, but he soldiered on, grousing about how many devices the agency had gotten in 2016, the end of 2016, which it wasn't able to penetrate. Those devices, he said, were linked to an array of criminal counterintelligence and terrorism investigations, but he did not bother to declare how not being able to penetrate those devices actually impacted the investigations, if in fact they did at all. But here is the center of it as far as I'm concerned. Comey denied that he is advocating for weaker encryption or for so-called encryption backdoors into our phones. Oh no, he said, what actually is that firms can retain access to a person's communications while also providing strong encryption. Which doesn't even make sense. How can a company provide strong encryption while still being able to access our communications at will? What kind of encryption is that? What kind of privacy is it that can be penetrated at will? Comey acknowledged that Americans have a reasonable expectation of things like our cars and houses and whatnot, which is really big of him. But then he went on to spin a dark tale of a criminal world forever hidden from FBI's view, while saying both that sophisticated criminals, nation states, and spies have had access to encryption technology for decades, and that the more widespread availability of encryption tools now is the real problem. Which means, really, that he's saying the problem is us. Ordinary people, everyday people, because we're the ones that benefit from the wider availability of those encryption tools, because he says the crooks, the nations, and the spies, they've had it for decades. We're the ones who are now able to better protect our secrets, and that's what he is exercised about. We're the one in James Comey's crosshairs, because the one thing the state cannot abide is the ability of the public to keep its own secrets. That's it for this week. We're out of here. You just have the best week you possibly can. We will see you next week, same time, same place, all the rest of that business. But for now, as always, peace.